I disappeared for half a year, and no one noticed. No missed calls, no "where are you?", not even a forgotten birthday text. But then Bryce got engaged, and suddenly I mattered again, not for love, not for concern, but because Issa's family wanted a full table, a perfect picture. That's when the calls came flooding in, demanding guilt-laced and far too late. I wasn't their daughter, I was a prop, and I'd rather vanish all over again than smile for a camera, pretending I was part of something I never belonged to. The day I left Arlington, the air smelled like rust and early spring rain. I remember it not for the weight of the goodbye, but for the absence of it. No one stood on the porch waving. No one sent a last-minute text. My parents didn't even know I was going. That morning I closed the door of my one-bedroom apartment for the final time and locked it behind me like sealing a vault. The silence felt earned, not a funeral, not a loss, just freedom, clean and cold. Tessa arrived first, balancing a tray of coffee cups and breakfast burritos on her hip, like a waitress in a diner we used to go to during college. "Ready to start your great escape," she grinned. Leo pulled up minutes later in his rusty pickup, a playlist already blasting from the speakers, half melancholy, half empowerment anthem. I smiled but didn't say much. I had told them the basics: remote job, quieter life, need for change. They believed me because they wanted to. That's the thing about good friends. They don't pry when you're barely holding the lid on. Together we packed the last of the boxes, mismatched kitchenware, a laundry basket of books photos I almost didn't take. I folded my old quilt and stuffed it into a duffel bag like it didn't carry the weight of 15 winters. My hands moved automatically, wrap tape label. No tears, no tremble, just movement, purpose. "You sure you don't want to tell them?" Tessa asked gently, nodding toward my phone screen, dark and untouched on the counter. "They haven't asked where I live in 3 years," I said flatly. "Why start now?" Leo winced. Still brutal, though. Not brutal, I corrected. Just true. I could see they didn't fully understand, but they didn't push. And I was grateful for that. Some griefs are too old to explain. The U-Haul groaned as Leo reversed it into the driveway. We loaded everything in under grey skies, pausing only for gas station snacks and a quick photo by the apartment sign, something they insisted on for memory's sake. But I didn't want to remember. I wanted to erase. The drive to Montana took 2 days. We stayed at a motel in Boise the first night, the kind with floral bedspreads and vending machines that still took quarters. Tessa fell asleep mid-sentence. Leo snored like a diesel engine. I lay awake scrolling through my messages, not a single one from Mom. Not even a "how's work" from Dad. That silence wasn't new, it had been part of the background noise of my life. I just finally decided to stop listening. When we crossed the Montana state line, something shifted in my chest, like an unclenching I hadn't realized was happening. My new place sat at the edge of a pine-covered ridge. Quiet, plain, exactly what I needed. We spent the afternoon unloading, arguing over where the couch should go and what drawer should hold the silverware. Tessa stuck a magnet on the fridge that read "New Life Who Dis I," laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was hers. It felt like something solid. But that night after they left, I opened the drawer in my nightstand and pulled out the envelope. Inside was a letter. Not one I received, but one I had written. To my family. I read it again even though I knew every line. It wasn't dramatic, it didn't beg, it just said I was leaving, that I couldn't keep trying when no one else did. That being invisible in your own home was worse than being gone. I had left the envelope on the kitchen counter of the old apartment, taped it under the salt shaker. No one ever mentioned it. No calls, no emails, no knock on the door. They'd seen it or ignored it. Either way, the message was clear. I folded it back up and put it away, not because it hurt, but because it didn't anymore. The first few weeks in Montana were quieter than I imagined, and I imagined quiet. Mornings began with the soft hum of my kettle, the hiss of water meeting coffee grounds, and the distant rustle of pine needles. I woke when I wanted logged into work wearing pyjama pants and cooked real dinners for one. There was no one to interrupt, no one to dismiss me mid-sentence, no forced conversations around the dinner table. Just space. My apartment was modest, a second-floor unit, with creaky floors and a balcony overlooking a ridge thick with trees. It smelled faintly of cedar and old radiator heat. I hung string lights on the balcony, bought mismatched dishes from a local thrift store, and arranged my books by colour because I could. I chose my life detail by detail. For the first time in years, I felt like I owned something, even if it was just stillness. My job, a remote position with a cybersecurity firm based in Seattle, filled my days with codes and conference calls. I was good at it. No one overlooked me in Slack channels. My boss sent emails that ended with great work. My name mattered somewhere. It was a novelty I hadn't grown used to yet. Tessa and Leo kept in touch, sending memes and photos from their chaotic city lives. Sometimes we video called while cooking or folding laundry. They always asked how Montana was treating me. I always said peaceful and meant it. But even peace, when uninterrupted for too long, can begin to echo. It hit me one Tuesday night, 3 weeks in. I was sitting on the balcony with a mug of chamomile tea, watching the horizon melt from gold to navy. The phone sat on the table beside me, screen dark, no texts, no missed calls. My birthday had passed 2 days earlier, no card, not even an accidental emoji from Mom. That part didn't surprise me. It wasn't the first time. But something about the silence this time felt definitive. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was something quieter, acknowledged maybe. Acknowledged that I had become a ghost in their lives, and the exorcism was mutual. That's why I didn't recognize the number when the phone finally did ring. It wasn't local. It wasn't saved. For a moment, I just stared at it. A name didn't flash across the screen, just digits. 11 of them. My thumb hovered, considering. Then I picked up. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then a voice, smooth and unfamiliar. "Hi, is this Claire Morrison?" "Yes, this is Deborah Carlyle. I believe you're Bryce's sister." The mention of Bryce made something in my stomach shift. "Yes," I said slowly. "I am." "I hope you don't mind me calling," she continued. "I got your number from the HR records Bryce's mother shared with us. I wanted to introduce myself, Issa's mother. We're hosting a dinner next month for the family, and I realized I'd never had the chance to speak with you directly." I blinked, stunned. "You're calling me," I repeated. "Yes, of course. Issa talks about how important family is. We want to make sure everyone feels included." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. 6 months gone, not a word from my parents. And the first person to acknowledge my existence was a stranger marrying into the very family that forgot me. "I appreciate that," I managed to say. She went on to describe the event date, time, location. She assumed I already knew, of course. Why wouldn't I? Families communicate. Families coordinate. "I'll have Issa send you the invite directly," she added cheerfully. "We're really looking forward to meeting you." I hung up and stared at the wall. Not angry, not shaken, just hollowed out. They hadn't told her I was gone. They hadn't even told her I existed until now. The invitation came the next day via email. The subject line read, "We're so excited to celebrate I didn't open it. I didn't need to." For the first time since moving, I felt the stillness crack, not from loneliness, but from recognition. They hadn't noticed I left, but they needed me to complete a picture. The call came 2 days after the email from Issa's mother. I knew the number before I saw it etched into my memory, like the shape of my childhood house, or the exact tone of disapproval in my father's voice. Gregory Morrison. My father never called for casual reasons. He was a man of necessity and control. Phones were for commands, not conversations. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to remind myself that I didn't have to, that I could have let it go to voicemail and buried it like the other unanswered things between us. "Claire," he said. "Not hi, not how are you?" Just my name sharp and flat, like it offended him to speak it. Dad, I replied evenly. You need to come home next weekend. No pleasantries, no warm-up, just the edict. It hit like a blast of cold air through an open door. For what I asked, though, I already knew. Bryce's engagement dinner. Issa's parents want to meet the whole family. His voice was clipped businesslike, as if he were arranging logistics for a company merger, not inviting his daughter, his only daughter, to a milestone event. You didn't think to tell me earlier, I asked, my voice as calm as I could make it. We didn't know if you were available. I almost laughed. Available, I had been practically shouting into the void for years, and only now did they notice the silence. I'm not coming, I said flatly. There was a pause. I expected the usual, a sharp breath, a scolding, maybe a guilt-laced retort about family obligations. But instead, something shifted in his voice. Well, we'd really like you to be there, he said softer now, almost cordial. It would mean a lot to your brother. I frowned. My father didn't do softness. He didn't do we'd like. He did you will, and because I said so. This version of him, measured, persuasive, set off alarms in my head. Bryce didn't call me, I said slowly. He's been busy. Dad replied quickly. Too quickly. No one called me, I added. No one cared where I was until you needed a full head count. That's not fair, isn't it? He hesitated. I could hear him trying to choose his next words. This wasn't about reunion. This was strategy. Issa's family is very traditional, he said carefully. They expect appearances, you not being there. It raises questions. And there it was. The truth behind the request. Not love, not concern. Optics. So I'm a placeholder, I asked. A missing puzzle piece for the perfect picture. That's not how it is. It's exactly how it is, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Claire, he said, and I noticed the shift again. He was trying to recalibrate. Look, we've had our differences, but this dinner is important. For all of us. Funny how my existence becomes important only when there's an audience. You're twisting this. No, I'm finally seeing it clearly. He sighed, and for a moment I thought he might snap, return to the voice I knew, the one that stung like frostbite. But he didn't. He stayed soft. Suspiciously soft. I know things haven't been perfect, he said slower now. But families go through seasons. This could be a new beginning, from the man who hadn't called in years, who hadn't noticed when I disappeared, who needed me only to appease strangers. I'm not coming, I said again, firmer this time. You'll regret this, he warned, but even the threat lacked its usual venom. There was something else there, fear, desperation. I didn't answer. I ended the call without another word. Staring at the phone in my hand, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not sadness, not guilt, just suspicion. That wasn't my father's real voice, not the one I knew. That voice was wearing a mask, and whatever was underneath, I had a feeling I wouldn't like it. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time staring at nothing. The silence around me was thick, pressing in like fog. My tea had gone cold. My back ached from the tension I didn't realize I'd been holding. And then, without meaning to, I opened the drawer in my desk and pulled out the old photo album I hadn't touched in years. It was a hand-me-down, its spine worn the plastic pages yellowing around the edges. I hadn't brought much from Arlington, but this I couldn't leave behind. I told myself it was for closure, not nostalgia. I flipped through the pages. Christmas mornings, first day of school, backyard birthday parties. In every photo, Bryce was front and centre, grinning, hands raised, always caught mid-laughter. I was there too sometimes, at the edge, off focus, half-turned. One photo stopped me cold. It was from the regional science fair when I was 11. I stood next to my project, a working model of a self-sustaining greenhouse. The trophy was taller than my knees. I remembered winning that day. I remembered how proud my teacher was. I remembered coming home and setting the trophy on the kitchen counter, waiting for someone to say something. Anyone. Instead, my mum walked in, glanced at it and said, "Careful with that. You'll scratch the counter, no congratulations, no tell me how it works, just an afterthought." Like I was. I closed the album. Each memory was a pinprick small on its own, but together death by 1,000 cuts, report cards left unnoticed, college acceptance letters pinned to my wall, but never asked about. Job offers I shared in passing, hoping for a flicker of pride that never came. I stopped sharing eventually. It hurt less that way, but the worst wasn't the silence. It was the moments of deliberate erasure. I didn't remember the incident clearly until much later. I must have been around 20 home for a cousin's wedding. It was a formal affair, white linens, expensive wine relatives from both coasts. I stayed quiet most of the night, trying not to draw attention. Near the end of the reception, I was in the restroom when I overheard two women talking. I didn't know Gregory only had one child, one said. Bryce seems lovely. Oh yes, the other replied. He and Susan are so proud of him. My blood froze. One child? At first I thought I'd misheard. But then I remembered during dinner, a great-uncle had asked me if I was the date of that friend from Seattle. He didn't even know my name. Later that night I confronted my father about it. He waved it off. People forget things. You're quiet. They assume I'm not your daughter. It's not about that. We didn't want to confuse the guests. Confuse them. I had been a source of confusion, an inconvenience, a whisper, not a name. That memory hit me now like a slap. I hadn't thought of it in years, but it rose to the surface like a bruise suddenly touched. It wasn't just neglect, it was deliberate omission. I had been edited out, and now after all that they wanted me back in the photos, back in the narrative, but only because Issa's family expected symmetry, only because a missing daughter would look unseemly. I stood up and walked to the window. The pines swayed in the wind, indifferent. The sky was turning dark stars pricking through one by one. Somewhere people were gathering around dinner tables, laughing, clinking glasses, and here I was, miles away, not alone, but certainly not remembered. I wasn't angry, not the hot shouting kind. It was colder than that. Sharper, like stepping barefoot on a shard of glass you thought you'd swept away. They had once told the world Bryce was their only child. Maybe it was time I started living like that was true. It started with a text from my mother. Susan Morrison was not a frequent texter. Her fingers were too stiff, her tone too formal for emojis or abbreviations. But the message was simple, unmistakably hers. Please reconsider. This dinner is important. Your brother needs you. I didn't answer. The next day she called. I didn't pick up. Then came the emails. Subject: family should stick together. Subject: just one evening. Subject: don't make this harder than it is. Each one more urgent than the last. Each one dripping with guilt coated in etiquette. Then came Bryce. My brother, the golden boy. He left a voicemail I didn't expect. Hey Claire, I don't know what's going on between you and Mom and Dad, but this thing with Isa, it's big for me. I'd like you to be there. It's just a dinner. You don't have to stay long. Just show up, say a few words, smile a little. For me. There was a part of me, small, long buried, that almost softened. Bryce had never been cruel, just blind. He'd lived in the centre of a spotlight that made everything outside its beam look like shadow, including me. But I couldn't forget all the times he looked away when I needed him, the birthdays missed, the achievements shrugged off, the silence when I left. And now suddenly my presence was urgent. I deleted the voicemail. The next morning my father called again. This time there was no softness, no diplomacy. If you don't come, he said, don't expect to be included in the will. There it was, the final card. I almost laughed. I don't need anything from you, I said. Not money, not approval. You're bluffing. If you ever cared enough to ask about my life, I replied, you'd know I'm not. He hung up. By the end of the week, I'd received 7 calls, 11 texts, and 2 more emails. One even included an RSVP form. My name was already printed on the place card. Then came the twist. Issa called. Not a text, not an email, a real call. Her voice was polite, cautious. Hi, Claire. I hope I'm not intruding. I hesitated. Hi. No, it's okay. Wanted to say I'm really looking forward to meeting you at the dinner. There was a pause. Something tightened in my chest. Isa, I said carefully, how long have you known about me? She was quiet. Too quiet. Truthfully, she said. About 2 weeks. My stomach dropped. I only found out when I was helping your mum draft the guest list, she added quickly. She mentioned you kind of in passing. I waited. She said you were travelling. That you might not make it. I asked Bryce and he just said you keep to yourself. I didn't push. I let the silence stretch. It said more than I ever could. I'm sorry, she said finally. I assumed, I don't know, that there'd been a falling out or something private, but it felt weird. Like no one wanted to talk about you, like you were some secret. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. That's not new, I said. It's just the first time someone noticed. Isa was quiet again. I don't want to make things worse, she said. But I thought you should know. Your mum only added your name to the printed program this week. This week. She told the printer there'd been a last-minute confirmation. But I never confirmed. I know. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But mostly I wanted to disappear again, because this wasn't about me being forgotten. It was about me being deliberately erased, then penciled back in when it suited the picture. I'm sorry, Isa said again. I don't know what's really going on. But if you come, it should be because you want to, not because they want you to fill a seat. Her voice was kind. Too kind for someone caught in the middle. I appreciate that, I said quietly. We hung up not long after. I sat there staring at the RSVP form on my laptop. They didn't invite me, they deployed me. And I was done being used. 3 days passed before the final attempt came. My mother, this time. Her voice was sharper than usual when I picked up less practiced warmth, more tightly wound resolve. Claire, we need to talk. I'm listening, I said flatly. This behaviour is not acceptable. You're making a scene over nothing. You mean over being forgotten for years and suddenly expected to perform like a puppet no mum? I'm finally not making a scene. I'm making a boundary. There was a sharp exhale on her end. I imagined her pacing the kitchen, the one with the marble backsplash and the untouched designer knives. Your father and I have tried, she continued, her tone rehearsed. But we can't keep begging. You didn't start begging, I said. You started demanding, then shaming, then bribing. We want you to be part of the family. You want me in the photograph, I corrected. Not the family. That ship sailed long ago. Her voice dropped a register. Then don't be surprised when you're left out. Completely. Financially. Permanently. There it was again, the will. The last lever they had to pull. Threats dressed in inheritance. I told Dad already, I said. Keep it, burn it, frame it. I don't want anything from you. Don't be dramatic. I'm not, I said calmly. I just finally have something better. She paused as if she'd misheard. What does that mean? She asked. I took a breath. I'm a mother now. Silence. Not the kind of shocked silence that lasts a second or two. This was deep, disbelieving silence. Like the kind that falls over a courtroom when an unexpected verdict is read. You're what I adopted a little girl 6 months ago. Her name is Emma. She's 7. Brown curls, tooth gap, loves dinosaurs and grilled cheese. And I didn't tell you because you never asked anything about my life. Not once. You adopted. Wait, why would you? She's the daughter of a woman I used to know. A neighbour back in Arlington. You probably don't remember her. Amanda. Lived 2 doors down. Single mum, worked nights. You used to call her messy. I don't... She knocked on our door once. I continued, ignoring her, desperate. Emma was a baby. She needed someone to watch her, just for a few hours. You shut the door in her face. That's not true, she snapped. I remember it, I said, clear as glass. Amanda cried all the way back to her apartment. That wasn't our responsibility, my mother said stiffly. Maybe not, but it became mine. The line went dead quiet again. I could hear my own heartbeat. You took in a stranger's child, she said finally, voice hollow. She's not a stranger, not anymore. She's my daughter, my family, and you didn't think we deserved to know why I asked. So you could forget her too, so you could use her one day as part of some illusion. She didn't reply. Emma knows who loves her, I said softly. She doesn't need anyone else pretending. I can't believe you'd do something like this. No, I said. You can't believe I'd do something without needing your approval. There was a pause. Then she hung up. I didn't feel the usual sting. No guilt, no second guessing, just a strange, grounded kind of peace. I looked over at the couch where Emma sat, legs curled under her drawing stick dinosaurs on construction paper. She glanced up, squinting at me through oversized glasses. You okay? She asked. I smiled. Better than okay. Want to see my pterodactyl? I walked over, sat beside her, and admired the crooked wings and spiky teeth. It's perfect, I said. She beamed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing approval. I wasn't fighting to be seen. I was right where I was meant to be. And I had already chosen my family. The phone rang late Sunday morning, just as the sun broke through the pines and painted the floor of my apartment in gold. I expected another unknown number, maybe one more veiled threat or guilt trip wrapped in polite concern. But when I saw the name, I smiled. Grandma Mabel. I answered on the first ring. Hi, sweetheart, she said, her voice warm and familiar like a quilt wrapped around tired bones. Hi, Grandma. You sound like you've been breathing mountain air. I have. Pine and quiet. She chuckled. Good for the lungs and the soul. We didn't mention the others. Not yet. Mabel had a way of making silence feel like conversation. She always waited for me to speak first, never prodding, never pressing. That was her gift. Where my parents filled space with expectations and correction, she filled it with permission. After a few minutes of talking about Emma's new obsession with prehistoric sharks and the deer that visited our backyard at dawn, she finally asked, Are you okay? Really? I am, I said, and I meant it. She paused like she was choosing her next words carefully. They asked me to call you, she admitted gently. Your mother mostly. Said you weren't listening to reason. I snorted. Their version of reason is wearing a mask and smiling for the camera. I figured, she said. I told them I'd call, but not for them. That part mattered more than she probably realized. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, broken only by the distant hum of a neighbour's lawnmower. I've been thinking a lot lately, she said. About you, about when you were little. I closed my eyes. Please don't tell me I was always smiling. She laughed. You weren't. You were serious, observant, noticed everything, including how people looked right past you. That sounds more accurate. You used to come sit on the porch swing with me, she continued, even when you were 5 or 6. Just to sit, not to talk. I used to think this girl has an old soul. I swallowed hard. I almost took you in once, she said suddenly. When you were 10. The words hit like a thud in my chest. What? You probably don't remember, but there was a time when things got bad. Your parents were fighting a lot. Your mother was distant. You were acting out nothing serious, just different, withdrawn. And I offered. I told them you could stay with me for a while, just to give everyone space. I couldn't breathe for a second. What happened? They said no. Said it would confuse the family. Your father told me to stay in my lane, that it wasn't my place. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. My hands were shaking. I didn't know that I whispered. I didn't tell you, she said softly, because I didn't want you to feel rejected twice. But maybe I should have. Maybe you deserved to know someone saw what was happening. A tear slid down my cheek, hot and fast. I didn't wipe it away. You did see me, I said. She was quiet. I wish I'd fought harder, she said finally. You did enough, I said. You're the only one who ever saw me and didn't try to edit me out. We talked for a while longer, about Emma, about whether she liked peaches, about if I had room for a fig tree in the yard. By the time we hung up, the world felt a little less tilted. There was no ask in her call, no request, no manipulation, just presence. And that more than any family dinner was what being seen really looked like. 3 days after the call with Grandma Mabel, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Just a simple white envelope handwritten in neat cursive. Inside was a card, thick cream-coloured stock with gold trim. But it wasn't an invitation. It was a note. Claire, I hope this doesn't feel like an intrusion. I know things are complicated, but I wanted to reach out not as Bryce's fiancée, not as your parents' hopeful daughter-in-law, but as a person. I've been sensing a lot that doesn't add up. The timeline, the awkward silences when your name comes up, the way your parents changed the subject every time I asked about you. I knew something was off, but I didn't expect the extent. I'm sorry. I'm sorry they tried to reduce you to a name tag on a dinner seat. I'm sorry I didn't know sooner. I'd like to hear from you, not through them, not as a family accessory, just from you. Coffee, no pressure, no expectations. I just want to understand. Issa. I read it twice, then a third time. The paper trembled in my hand, but not from anger, from relief. For once, someone inside their orbit had seen through the performance and cared enough to say something, to do something. That night, I called Grandma Mabel back. She picked up on the second ring as if she'd been waiting. You were right, I said. About what? They're starting to see it. She didn't ask who. She already knew. Issa, yeah. She's smart, Mabel said. Sharp eyes, soft heart. She sent me a letter. I said, voice lower now. She knows something's wrong. Mabel hummed in that knowing way of hers. Sometimes it just takes one person asking the right question to bring down a whole facade. I didn't have to argue, I whispered. Didn't have to justify or defend. She just saw it. That's because it's visible now. Once you left the gap you left behind became obvious. They tried to patch it with illusion, but the cracks are showing. I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at Emma's dinosaur drawings on the fridge. I hadn't realised how much of my life had been spent trying to be understood, trying to be visible in a house that treated me like clutter. And now I was standing still. And they were the ones scrambling. I thought I'd have to fight forever, I said. To be seen. To prove I mattered. You already did, Mabel said. The fight was you walking away. I sat down holding the letter again. Issa's words echoed in my mind, not out of guilt or pity, but genuine curiosity, wanting to know me, not the version edited and repackaged by my parents. A strange sense of lightness washed over me, not vindication, just relief. I didn't have to keep shouting into the void. Someone had finally heard me. The next morning I replied, Issa, thank you. For reaching out, for noticing, for not looking away when it got uncomfortable. Yes, I'd like to meet. Somewhere quiet, neutral, where we can talk without scripts. I'm free next Friday afternoon. There's a coffee shop near my place that serves a mean lavender latte. If you're still interested, I'll be there at 2. Claire. I didn't expect her to come, but I hoped she would, because in a world of polished family portraits and rehearsed smiles, Issa had done something radical. She looked behind the curtain. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to tear it down. Someone else pulled it aside for me. The engagement dinner was held at a vineyard just outside of Richmond, all glass walls and curated lighting, where even the shadows felt manicured. White linen draped across long wooden tables, flickering candles lined the centerpieces, and the whole place smelled faintly of roses and roast lamb. Isa looked radiant in a deep emerald dress that made her skin glow. Bryce stood tall beside her, exuding the quiet confidence he'd always worn like a tailored coat. Their families mingled like actors in a well-rehearsed play, laughing just loud enough, smiling just wide enough. Except for one seat, mine. It sat empty, third from the left, with a printed place card that read Claire Morrison, a placeholder, literally and figuratively, an outline of a person who didn't fit the picture. No one mentioned it at first. They spoke around it like people speak around illness or death, but Issa noticed, and so did her mother. Deborah Carlyle had the kind of elegance that demanded answers without ever raising her voice. She was sharp-eyed, always watching, reading, collecting details others missed. And now she was staring at the empty chair. She leaned towards Susan Morrison, her voice low but firm. "Where's your daughter?" My mother smiled, the kind that creaked under pressure. "Oh, Claire sends her regards. She, unfortunately, couldn't make it." Last-minute conflict. Deborah said. "That's a shame. I was very much looking forward to meeting her." Susan's lips twitched. "Yes, we all were." Deborah glanced toward Bryce, who was suddenly focused on adjusting a fork that didn't need adjusting. Later over the salad course, Deborah tried again. "She's your only daughter, right?" My mother paused a second too long. "Yes, but not your only child." "No, of course not," Susan replied too quickly. "Bryce is our oldest." Deborah's smile thinned. "Interesting. Bryce mentioned he was an only child at one point. Said something about growing up alone." Susan's hand tightened around her wine glass. "Oh, well, you know how siblings can be. Estranged, distant. Claire has always been independent." Deborah tilted her head. "Is she close to Bryce?" My father chimed in, then voice measured. "They had different temperaments growing up. Claire's always been more private, a little difficult at times." "Difficult," Deborah repeated, voice still calm. "And yet you added her to the seating chart." There was a moment, a crack in the surface. "Well, it was the right thing to do," Susan said tightly, "but not the honest thing." The table fell quiet. Deborah excused herself shortly after the entree and found Grandma Mabel by the fire pit where she was sipping tea and staying out of the political theatre inside. "Mind if I join you?" Deborah asked. Mabel looked up, surprised. "Not at all." They sat in silence for a minute, listening to the quiet wind and the distant hum of music inside. "I hope I'm not crossing a line," Deborah said finally, "but I'm trying to understand what's not being said in there." Mabel smiled faintly. "You're not the first. I've asked about Claire, more than once, and I've gotten a dozen different answers." "That sounds about right. Is she—" "Okay. She's better than okay," Mabel said. "She's thriving. She's found peace. Something she never had in that house." Deborah's gaze softened. "What happened?" Mabel hesitated. Then gently she said, "Claire was the quiet child. The steady one, never caused trouble, never demanded attention. And because of that, they ignored her. They edited her out. And when she finally walked away, they didn't notice until it cost them something." Deborah didn't speak, just nodded slowly. She was never less, Mabel added. But they made her feel that way. "She didn't come because of them," Deborah murmured mostly to herself. "She didn't come because she finally chose herself." Deborah sat back in her chair. "That's the bravest thing I've heard all night. She's the bravest person I know," Mabel said. Inside, Bryce raised a toast. The room clapped. Glasses clinked. Outside, under the stars, two women sat in quiet agreement, one who had always seen the truth and one who had just begun to. I was watering the herbs on my balcony when the phone rang. I recognized the ringtone immediately. Mabel had insisted on a custom one, a jazzy piano riff that always made me smile. "Hey, Grandma," I said, holding the phone between my cheek and shoulder as I nudged a stubborn basil leaf back into place. "She knows," Mabel said without preamble. I stopped moving. "Isa." She pulled me aside after dessert, said she wanted the truth. I gave it to her. I leaned on the railing, the wind brushing my face like a second breath. "And I asked?" She wasn't surprised, just disappointed, sad mostly. Said she felt like she'd been sold a story and only now found the footnotes. I let that sink in. "She said she'd write you again," Mabel added. "Said she didn't want her version of family to begin with a lie." I didn't say anything right away. A part of me had been waiting for that shoe to drop the inevitable crash when the mask slipped. But I hadn't expected Isa to be the one to care about the debris. "How was the rest of the night?" I asked. Mabel snorted, tense enough to snap a violin string. That bad Bryce barely smiled. Susan kept checking her phone. "Gregory drank too fast, too early." Isa was gracious, but even she couldn't pretend everything was fine. And the empty seat, Deborah stared at it all evening like it was going to grow legs and explain itself. I laughed, short and breathy. They tried to fill it, Mabel said, moved the place cards around at one point. But it didn't help. That seat was louder than any speech. A silence followed, comfortable this time. They're unravelling, I said quietly. Not because you caused it, Mabel replied, but because you stopped holding them together. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed and the house was quiet again, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of mint tea and reread Isa's letter. There was a second one now, shorter, more intimate. Claire, thank you for trusting me enough to meet what you shared. It matters. I see it now, all of it. I don't know what happens next, but I know I won't pretend again. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No family names attached, just Isa. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the first. I didn't reply yet. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't need to rush. For once, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. The next day, Leo called. You're not going to believe this, he said. Try me. Bryce showed up at my apartment. I blinked. What? Yeah. Full-on suit and confusion combo. Said he needed your number. My fingers curled slightly around the phone. What did you say? I told him I'd have to ask you first? Obviously. What else did he say? Leo hesitated. He looked lost. Not angry, not desperate, just like a guy who's finally realizing the mirror lied to him. I closed my eyes. Did he say why? He said Leo repeated slowly, I always thought I was the centre of things. Last night I realised I might have just been the loudest. I let out a slow breath. Do you want me to give him your number? Leo asked. No, I said. Not yet. Think he's trying to fix things? I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. No. I think for the first time he just wants to understand why the picture doesn't look the way he remembers it. Leo sighed. You okay? I think I am. I hung up and stared out the window. The sky was dusky purple clouds, brushed like watercolour across the horizon. Bryce was unravelling, not because he lost me, but because for the first time he felt what I had lived with my whole life, being the one left out. The messages started piling up again, texts, emails, even a voicemail from a number that didn't have a name attached, but carried my mother's brittle tone like perfume lingering in an elevator. Claire, please call us back. We can explain everything. Don't make this about old wounds. This is your brother's future. Don't ruin it. The sudden urgency wasn't new, but it was louder now, tinged with something more than guilt or performance. It was panic. Grandma Mabel called 2 nights after the dinner. They're spiralling, she said. You'd think someone lit a match in a fireworks store. What happened? Isa confronted them, said she wasn't moving forward with the wedding until she got the truth from everyone, not the polished version. I blinked. She's putting it on hold. She told Bryce she wants answers, full answers, and she told your parents that if they keep dodging, she's walking. That hit harder than I expected. Isa wasn't just listening, she was choosing clarity over comfort. And in that choice, she was doing what no one in my family ever had. They're calling everyone, Mabel added, trying to get someone to patch things up. They even asked me to speak with you again. What did you say I said? I don't manipulate people I love. I smiled. Of course you did. After we hung up, I sat on the couch and stared at my phone. Isa's last letter was still in the drawer, folded with care corners, slightly softened from being reread. Then I remembered something, an old voicemail, a message I'd saved not out of spite, but as a reminder. It was from my mother 2 years ago, after a family gathering I'd declined to attend. Her voice crackled through the speaker. You're exhausting, Claire. You never make anything easy. It's always some drama, some refusal. Honestly, it's like carrying a weight that never lets up. I don't know what we did to deserve a child who only knows how to make things harder. A burden, That was the phrase she used later when talking to someone else she thought I wasn't within earshot. A burden. I never forgot that word. So I clipped that part of the voicemail, trimmed it to the raw essence, and attached it to an email. Subject: in case you're still wondering. Issa: you wanted clarity. I can't give you their version of the truth, but I can give you mine. This is what I was to them for years. Quiet, tolerated. Until I wasn't useful anymore. You don't owe me anything, but you deserve to know what you're walking into. Claire. I hesitated for just a second before hitting send. Then I closed my laptop and went to check on Emma, who was curled up on the couch under a quilt, halfway through a dinosaur documentary. She looked up, her face lit by the blue glow of the TV. "Can we have popcorn?" she asked. "Only if I get the burnt pieces," she grinned. "Deal." We made popcorn and painted our nails and didn't talk about families or betrayal or weddings on the verge of collapse. We just existed, fully, honestly, together. The next morning I had an email. Subject: thank you. Claire. I listened to it, twice, not because I doubted you, but because I wanted to believe I was wrong about them. I wasn't. I've called off the wedding. Bryce knows. He understands more than I expected, but not enough to undo what's been done. You didn't deserve that. No one does. Thank you for trusting me. I hope this isn't goodbye. Issa, I sat with the email for a long time. Not smiling, not crying, just still. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt released. They'd built their illusion on silence and symmetry. But truth had always been the stronger foundation, and now that truth had cracked the picture frame wide open, and the person they'd framed out, she was already gone. I didn't celebrate the broken engagement. There was no victory lap, no moment of fist-pumping satisfaction. I didn't want things to fall apart for Issa, or even for Bryce, not really. What I wanted, what I had always wanted, was the truth to be louder than the lie. And now it was. The days that followed were quiet in a different way, not the kind of quiet where you're waiting for something to collapse, but the kind where things have already fallen and what remains is peace. The emails from my parents stopped, no more texts. No more missed calls, just space. Finally, I returned to my work with a renewed rhythm, caught up on reports, restructured my task board. Emma's school started a week-long art camp, so the mornings were filled with finger paint and glitter glue, and the evenings were hers again. We planted cherry tomatoes in the backyard and argued about which dinosaur would win in a race. She said raptors, I said triceratops. We never reached consensus. Leo came by with a bottle of wine and a stack of bad movies. Tessa mailed a book she said reminded her of me, a memoir by a woman who left her family behind and never looked back. I didn't take that as a prompt. I took it as validation. Life settled. And then, like a bad magic trick, the past returned in the form of a plain white envelope with my father's handwriting on it. No return address, no apology. I stood at the mailbox, fingers tightening around the envelope. Part of me wanted to toss it straight into the trash. Another part, curious, cautious, walked it back into the house and laid it flat on the kitchen table. I didn't open it right away. I made tea first, lit the candle Emma had made out of melted crayons, and waited until the water boiled. Only when I was ready did I unfold the letter. It wasn't long. Claire. We understand your choices, even if we disagree with them. But this situation with Issa has become untenable. There are questions being asked, people are speculating, the Carlyles are influential, and the fallout is affecting more than just our family reputation. We're asking you to consider releasing a statement, something neutral, nothing inflammatory, just a clarification, something that paints this in a softer light. For everyone's sake. You don't have to mention specifics, just acknowledge the complexity, that misunderstandings happen, that family is difficult. We're not asking for an apology, just discretion. Gregory Morrison. There was no dear, no love, no warmth. It was a letter written not to a daughter but to a public relations risk. I sat back, letting the paper fall limp on the table. He hadn't written to reconnect. He hadn't written to apologize. For the years of silence, the cruelty, the erasure. He had written to clean up the mess, not mine their own. Their carefully manicured image had cracked, and now they wanted me to hold the pieces together just long enough for the Carlyles to look away. I took a deep breath. Then I flipped the letter over and wrote a single sentence on the back with a ballpoint pen. The truth doesn't need polishing, it only needs daylight. I folded the paper back up, slid it into a new envelope, and dropped it at the post office the next morning. No statement, no softening, just silence wrapped in clarity. At home, Emma was drawing on the patio legs, crossed tongue poking out in concentration. "What are you working on?" I asked. "Portrait," she said proudly. "Of you." I crouched down beside her. On the paper was a stick figure with curly hair, big eyes and a wide smile. Next to it, a smaller figure with glasses and a cape. "I gave you powers," she said. I smiled. "What kind truth powers?" she said seriously. "Like you can see lies and make them melt." I looked at her, this child who had been dropped into my life with no warning, and filled it with colour. "Pretty good power," I whispered. She nodded and kept colouring. And I, Claire Morrison, once invisible, once erased, sat beside her and felt nothing but whole. No letter from my father could undo that. Not now, not ever. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter for 2 days before I burned it. It wasn't anger that made me do it. Not defiance either. It was something cleaner, like cutting the last thread on a shirt that never fit right. I took it outside, placed it gently in the fire pit, struck a match, and watched the edges curl inward, blackening like dry leaves. The words, my father's tidy handwriting, his call for discretion, disappeared into smoke. When it was done, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty in the best possible way, like a room that had finally been cleared of clutter. 2 weeks later, I bought the house. It wasn't fancy, just a modest craftsman with cedar siding and a backyard big enough for a garden. But the moment I stepped onto the porch, I felt it settle into me like it had been waiting. Emma ran from room to room the day we moved in, naming corners for imaginary creatures and claiming a patch of sunlight near the living room window as her official reading spot. Tessa and Leo arrived the next day with boxes, air mattresses, and an alarming amount of takeout. "We're christening this place properly," Tessa announced, unpacking candles, while Leo argued with Emma over who got the last dumpling. For the first time in my life, the word home didn't feel conditional. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't quiet desperation wrapped in matching holiday sweaters. It was loud and mismatched and full of soft chaos. It was laughter in the hallway and half-finished puzzles on the dining table. It was Tessa humming off key while doing dishes, Leo burning the garlic bread, Emma pretending to be a space archaeologist. It was mine. We spent nights on the porch, drinking wine mornings in the yard, planting herbs, afternoons, reading books, sprawled on mismatched couches. No one asked where I'd been. No one needed an explanation. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed and Leo had passed out mid-movie, I sat in the living room with Tessa legs curled beneath me, a blanket across our laps. "You're different," she said. "How so quieter?" But not in the sad way, in the "I'm not carrying a 100-pound backpack" way. I smiled. It's weird. I always thought healing would feel like fireworks or therapy breakthroughs, but mostly it feels like breathing. She clinked her mug against mine. "Here's to oxygen." The next morning, I found another envelope in the mailbox. This one I recognised instantly, not because of the handwriting, but the small sun sticker on the back. Issa. Inside was a note, handwritten on thick stationery. Claire. This may be the strangest thank you letter I'll ever write, but I need to say it. Thank you for showing me what truth looks like. Not the kind that's loud or angry, but the kind that stands still when everything else is spinning. I didn't see the cracks at first. I was too focused on the surface. But now I can't unsee them and I don't want to. You didn't just walk away. You walked into something real. That matters. I hope you know how rare that is. With respect, and always with truth, Issa, I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the mantel. Later that night, Emma found it and asked who it was from. Someone who used to be almost family, I said. Are they still? I thought for a moment. Not by name, but maybe by understanding. Emma nodded like that made perfect sense. That weekend we hosted our first backyard dinner. Friends brought mismatched chairs and covered dishes. Someone grilled corn. Someone else set up a makeshift photo booth with a sheet and string lights. Kids ran barefoot. Adults passed around pitchers of lemonade and stories that turned into inside jokes before the night was over. And somewhere in the middle of all that, watching Tessa dance with a plastic tiara, Leo trying to teach Emma the Macarena, a neighbour's toddler, falling asleep on my shoulder, I realised something I didn't miss being part of their family. I had built one better. The backyard glowed with string lights, looped around the fence like soft constellations. Laughter rose like music, unrehearsed, unscripted, alive. Folding chairs scraped against the stone patio. Someone turned up a playlist that had clearly been built by committee. And the grill hissed with the sound of corn peaches and something Leo insisted was experimental tofu. Emma darted between guests, a paper crown slightly askew on her head, clutching a popsicle in one hand and a plastic dinosaur in the other. She was sticky and barefoot and beaming. Tessa twirled with a glass of rosé in one hand, trying to teach a neighbour's 5-year-old how to spin without falling. Leo manned the grill with a spatula in one hand and a water gun in the other, narrowly avoiding getting ambushed by 3 kids armed with foam swords. The folding table overflowed with dishes, homemade pasta salad, sesame noodles, someone's suspicious-looking but delicious casserole. A tray of brownies disappeared in 20 minutes. Someone brought sweet tea spiked with lemon vodka. Someone else played ukulele. The evening was golden and strange and full of people who knew my name, not because of bloodlines, but because of presence. I stood near the edge of the garden, my plate forgotten, watching it all unfold. This was not the life I had been handed. It was the one I had chosen. "Hey," a voice said gently beside me. It was Miriam, a neighbour from 3 houses down. Late 30s, soft eyes, a laugh that always came easily. "Do you have family back east?" she asked, her tone casual, friendly. I didn't flinch. I didn't pause. "Not anymore," I said, and smiled. She nodded like that made perfect sense. No more questions. Later, when the sky deepened into navy and fireflies blinked lazily near the fence, Emma tugged on my hand. "Can I show you something?" "Of course." She led me toward the little garden we'd planted together. It was mostly herbs, a few sprigs of tomato, a row of stubborn marigolds. She pointed to a small rock newly painted with glitter and child-sized handwriting. On it were 3 words, "Home is here." I knelt beside her. "Did you make that?" I asked. She nodded. I wanted it to be official. I blinked hard. "It's beautiful." She leaned in close, wrapping her arms around my neck. Then she whispered something in my ear that stopped the world for a moment. "Mama," she said softly, "I choose you. Always. Not I love you. Not thank you. But I choose you." That sentence, the weight of it, the gift of it, landed deeper than any declaration I'd ever heard. I pulled her tighter. "I choose you too, Em," I whispered back. "Forever." She let go and skipped off toward the fire pit where someone had started roasting marshmallows. I stayed kneeling, the cool dirt grounding me, the moment blooming around me like something sacred. The world had told me I was a placeholder, a shadow, a daughter-shaped accessory. But here in a backyard filled with laughter and mismatched chairs with burned tofu and ukulele chords slightly out of tune, I had become something more. I was a mother, a friend, a home, not because someone gave me those titles, but because I grew into them piece by piece, moment by moment. Later, after the guests had trickled out, after Tessa had fallen asleep on the couch and Leo had curled up on a lawn chair, wrapped in a throw blanket, I stood at the edge of the yard. The air was still warm, heavy with honeysuckle and ash from the fire pit. Emma had fallen asleep in her bed, with her crown still on one hand clutched around a plastic velociraptor. I looked up at the stars, endless and indifferent, and whispered to them, not in prayer, but in thanks. I'm here, not hidden, not erased, seen, chosen, whole.